Secret governments. Quote, truth, the most deadly weapon ever discovered by humanity, capable of destroying entire perceptual sets, cultures, and realities, outlawed by all governments everywhere. Possession is normally punishable by death. End quote. John Gilmore, American author. Part of the disinformation used by the Anglo-American moneyed elite in order to influence and manipulate government officials is the argument that what they do is for the sake of democracy and nation building. They actively remind politicians, particularly when making a campaign contribution, that they are the financiers and corporate heads who help keep the world going round, along the lines of, quote, what is good for GM is good for the USA, and what is good for the USA is good for General Motors, end quote. This argument is simply a modern disguise of the age-old feudal system, and more recently, the colonial system. Colonized subjects were told their well-being depended on their participation and cooperation with the colonial system, a system they were told benefited workers and owners alike. Small uprising dissenters could easily be squashed by their superior military machine of rulers. Today, the powers that be use superior economic clout, the control of wealth, instead of military threat. This sort of process has been ongoing not only for decades, but for centuries. In the 13th century, the challenge to kings and queens of what they thought of as their divine right to rule had already been undermined with the popular idea of democracy, born with the Magna Carta around 1250. The invention of the Gutenberg press in 1497 dealt another blow to the hold of the monarchies and the church, the equivalent of today's 1% wealthiest, when the citizenry learned to read and decide for themselves. The similarities today are chilling. To the elite, it is much easier to let the common people vote and think they are in control. By allowing democracy to spread worldwide, the cabal can prevent close inspection of their operations, which would lead to revolution. Now the elite power brokers merely give the winners of elections their orders, rather than make their pronouncements to the whole country openly. They know where the power lies. Just consider this quote from British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli in 1876. Quote, the governments of the present day have to deal not merely with other governments, with emperors, kings, and ministers, but also with the secret societies which have everywhere their unscrupulous agents and can, at the last moment, upset all the government's plans, end quote. Yes, this is in fact a new age. The power elite's control is slipping, as is faith in government officials. In 2011, a full 87% of people surveyed in the United States say they mistrust the government, but do not exactly know where to place the blame. The powers that be know that their bid for complete control is nearly up, but not before they play one final hand. This is a clever group, and they have changed their game plan many times throughout history. What has not changed is that those in power who discover them and threaten to stop them will be bribed, silenced, or assassinated. The military-industrial complex. At his farewell speech in 1961, President Dwight D. Eisenhower may have been alluding to the growing power of national security agencies that dealt with war, to the ruling elite, or to the possibility of the extraterrestrial presence, or more likely all of three. Eisenhower saw these military-industrial interests as gaining far too much power. His remarkable speech is a tribute to an aging but savvy public servant who was once the highest-ranking general in World War II. Quote, "In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the power meshings of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together." End quote. Unfortunately, Ike unwittingly cast a die for a secret government that would set a precedent for decades to come. A few years later, Ike's presidential successor, John F. Kennedy, alluded to these secret societies, and it quite likely cost him his life. He said, quote, "The great enemy of the truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. Belief in myths allow the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought." End quote. President Kennedy had a strong suspicion that some CIA operatives were not the loyal civil servants of the president and the people, but had nefarious dealings with the shadow government. He was angered with the CIA's failure at the Bay of Pigs and declared he wanted to, quote, "splinter the CIA in 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds," end quote. Kennedy also remarked, quote, "If the United States ever experiences an attempt at a coup to overthrow the government, it will come from the CIA. The agency represents a tremendous power and a total unaccountability to anyone," end quote. This statement is accurate. Indeed, the CIA functions as a fourth branch of government, operates without oversight, and is actually more powerful than the other three branches of government. Just 1 month to the day after the JFK assassination, on December 22nd, 1963, former President Harry S. Truman wrote an op-ed article in the Washington Post. Truman titled his piece, quote, "Limit CIA Role to Intelligence," end quote. In that article, just 16 years after he and the Congress established the CIA, he said in part, quote, "For some time I have been disturbed by the way the CIA has been divested from its original assignment. It has become an operational and at times a policy-making arm of the government. This removal from its intended role has led to trouble and may have compounded our difficulties in several explosive areas. I never thought the CIA would be injected into peacetime cloak and dagger operations. I therefore would like to see the CIA restored to its original assignment as the intelligence arm of the president, and that its operational duties be terminated or properly used elsewhere," end quote. It would seem from this column that Truman thought the CIA might very well have had something to do with the JFK assassination. Interestingly, Harry Truman's column on the CIA was run in the afternoon edition of the Washington Post, but immediately removed from the later edition that day. Could it be that Truman struck a nerve? Could it be that all subsequent presidents since JFK are afraid of the CIA for reasons of national security. Accusations, excuse me, it's my smoothie. Sorry. That didn't go down too well. Take two. For reasons of national security, accusations of abuse and inhuman acts by the CIA and FBI were investigated by Congress in 1977. These agencies used the excuse of national security for every crime they were accused of committing. Under the guise of national security, there has not been an investigation of their highly illegal activities since 1977. The U.S. President, the Congress, and the Supreme Court are aware of them, but are afraid to provoke them. A mountain of evidence points to the fact that CIA assassins have killed thousands, including corporate executives, rogue politicians, whistleblowers, and quite possibly John F. Kennedy when he probed too deeply into the lawless abuses of the CIA. The three-tier standard government security clearance levels are well known: confidential, secret, and top secret. However, just having a clearance at one of these levels did not automatically give access to all information at that level. There has to be a demonstrable need-to-know reason in order to be briefed or to have access to documents on a given project, program, facility, or intelligence product. But this system is merely the white side of the security system. The rabbit hole goes much deeper on the black side. The problem is now the intelligence community itself is beholden to the controlling elite. The Bilderberg Group, now with offices in Geneva, Switzerland, was secretly established in 1952. They control the media, the banking, and the intelligence empires. The MITRE Corporation is a nonprofit group supporting the Department of Defense, the DoD, the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, the IRS, Veterans Affairs, and the newly formed Homeland Security Administration. The Jason Group are the planetary physicists in a government advisory group. Based on an admission from the Pentagon, the Jason Scholars hold the highest security clearance in the nation and have been assigned the protocol rank of Rear Admiral and are treated as such on any military installation or in any government office. The Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR, is also run by the secret government. All are beholden to the Bilderberger Group, including the CIA and the intelligence services who also work for the secret governments. The National Security Agency, the NSA, is especially malignant since it is not subject to any law unless that law specifically mentions the NSA by name. The NSA and CSS, that's Central Security Services, focuses on cryptology, the science of tracking and decoding signs and signals around the world for national security purposes. They regularly release fake documents, news stories, movies, and disinformation to throw off truth seekers. Secret governments and the cabal. The black operations have encountered great difficulty in maintaining international secrecy for their activities. Consequently, it was decided that an outside group was necessary to coordinate and control international efforts to provide better protection from national normal scrutiny of governments and the press. The result was the formation of a secret ruling body which became known as the Bilderberg Group. The policy committee of the Bilderbergers is the closest an investor can come to getting information about the secret world government. The Bilderberg Group has 39 permanent members. This is an important number to them because 13 times 3 equals 39, and because it is significant in Freemasonry. And most Bilderbergers are supreme Freemasons. In 1913, the United States saw the creation of the Federal Reserve and income tax. The CFR was formed in 1921. The U.S. Federal Reserve and almost all central banks worldwide are privately owned by Illuminati bankers, ruled over by the House of Rothschild. Quote, once anything goes, anything can come back and haunt us, quote, said Bill Moyers on PBS in 1987, referring to the secret government. Moyers also used another name, the, quote, cabal, which is the government behind the government. This cabal, working with the black ops of the U.S. government, maintains a host of projects together, including a network of deep underground military bases and structures, or the acronym DUMS. There are currently more than 130 known underground cities worldwide. The DUMS are built with nuclear-powered drills. Then the bases are connected with magneto-levitation trains able to travel at Mach 2 speeds. In 1945, President Truman enacted the UN Participation Act, the UN Treaty, and the first known secret government in the U.S. termed overt. For his part, President Eisenhower sealed the deal when he brokered an agreement with his election supporter Nelson Rockefeller to help tackle the ET problem. He knew that he could not do it by revealing the secret to Congress. Early in 1953, the new president turned to his friend and fellow member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and together, Eisenhower and Rockefeller began planning the structure of secretly supervising all alien-related events and responses. Within a year, their vision was to become a reality. The idea for MJ-12 was thus born. The Majestic 12 was the control group running the secret space program related to all alien activity. Asking Rockefeller for help with the alien issue was to be the biggest mistake Eisenhower ever made for the future of the United States, possibly for all of humanity. Majestic 12, subversion of the U.S. Constitution. The United States Constitution has been subverted ever since at least 1947, or possibly earlier. But just after World War II, an executive order under Truman created the National Security Council, the NSC. It was established to oversee the intelligence community and especially the alien problem. A series of NSC memos and executive orders removed the newly formed CIA from the sole task of gathering foreign intelligence and slowly but thoroughly legalized direct action in the form of covert activities at home or abroad. These NSC memos and secret executive orders set the stage for the creation of MJ-12 only 4 years later. Only a handful of members of Congress from the late 1940s, if any at all, would have known anything more than the Cold War issues were involved in this far-reaching national security legislation enacted at a time of near panic over a Soviet nuclear threat. The control group that is running the secret space program is called Majority, and any ET connection with the president is called Majestic. By Secret Executive Memorandum NSC 5510, President Eisenhower proceeded to establish Majestic 12 as a permanent committee to oversee and conduct all covert activities concerning the alien question. The name was shortened to MJ12 with numerical value because each of the 12 members on the panel had a vote. In their rush to compartmentalize and contain their secret, MJ12 was formed as a highly secretive group within the U.S. government. Among the 12 members on the MJ12 board, some were famous scientists and others were top military officials, but their identity on this committee was to remain ultra top secret. Thus began the under oath rules which still exist today. If anyone within the military ranks have ever had a close encounter with an ET or an observed spacecraft, they are required to take an immediate new oath of secrecy. They are required to sign documents attesting they did not see what the government told them they did not see. The language of the document is full of legalese, but the point is very clear. The person who was witness to a sighting was to never, ever discuss anything whatsoever with anyone regarding what they had seen, heard, or experienced during their service in the military, under pain of death as an act of treason against the United States of America. Truman and Eisenhower somewhat unwittingly led us into what was to become an entrenched secret government, and a young idealist who was the next president in line would attempt to get us out. Because he ordered a plan to disclose UFO truth among other provocative actions, highly placed spooks ordered the hit on President Kennedy. It appears that MI5, the CIA, and the FBI were used for the assassination and subsequent cover-up. Because JFK received a full briefing on UFOs and other secrets and passed this information on to his brother Bobby, neither could be trusted and both had to be taken out. Contrary to mainstream media accounts, Bobby was killed from a headshot at point-blank range from behind by one of the 3 CIA agents present at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, and only wounded by the brainwashed assassin Sirhan, who was shooting from the front. Bobby Kennedy's murder was quickly covered up with another lone nut. New presidents receive UFO briefings, but are never told everything. Sitting presidents now have at least 24 security levels of clearance before their access level. This is justified by giving the president a plausible deniability on the UFO issue. Today, every new president is given an above top secret and need to know clearances, but they do not have the umbra above top secret clearance to have access to upper level MJ12 secrets or the keystone documents pertaining to ET research. An independent special studies group, the Jason Scientific Group, separate from the Jason Group but supposedly with the same handlers, was tasked to study the ET issue. Jason members all have top security clearances, and they include physicists, biologists, chemists, oceanographers, mathematicians, and computer scientists. They are selected for their scientific brilliance, and over the years have included 11 Nobel Prize laureates and several dozen members of the United States National Academy of Sciences. 4 members of the Jason group sit on MJ-12. They discuss the most highly classified top secrets regarded as the most sensitive information in the United States. No MJ-12 documents have been leaked since 1977. It is speculated that MJ-12 remains to this day, but there are now more members on the board and they've changed their name. Their task is the same as it was since their founding: to research any acquired ET craft, study any recovered aliens, living or dead, and continue to work diligently to keep it all secret. The first casualty. MJ-12 would solicit the views of top leaders in the field. Ambitious, elite scientists such as Vannevar Bush, Albert Einstein, Charles Lindbergh, and Robert Oppenheimer, plus career military people such as Hoyt Vandenberg, Roscoe Hillenkotter, Leslie Groves, Jimmy Doolittle, and George Marshall, along with a select cast of other experts who feverishly and secretively labored to understand the alien agenda, technology, and its implications. The operations to handle the alien issue was established earlier by a special classified presidential order on September 24, 1947, at the recommendation of Secretary of Defense James Forrestal and Dr. Vannevar Bush, chairman of the Joint Research and Development Board. The goal of the group was to exploit everything they could from recovered alien technology. James Forrestal, while still in the U.S. Secretary of Defense in 1949, started to object to the secrecy. He was a very idealistic and religious man. He believed the public should be told. When he began to talk to leaders of the opposition party and leaders of Congress about the alien problem, he was asked to resign by President Truman. He expressed his fears to many people. Rightfully, he believed he was being watched. Forrestal was said to have gone crazy in the halls of the Pentagon. He babbled about the, quote, space people who were about to attack us and that we were defenseless. Officialdom explained that his breakdown was due to the pressures of the Cold War, and maybe so, but his paranoia was not centered upon the Soviets, but on perceived space people. Friends reported that he told them that the weirdos could appear as normal humans and had already infiltrated the most sensitive parts of government. He also thought that they had tapped his phone and read his mail. Forrestal was said to have suffered a nervous breakdown. Although it had no authority to do so, the Truman administration committed him to the Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland. It was feared that Forrestal would begin to talk again, so he had to be isolated and discredited. His friends and family were denied permission to visit. One can speculate that his paranoia was real. in that he was being watched and followed due to his breaking security laws about ETs. What we don't know is whether or not he actually had pathological symptoms, whether or not he knew of possible malevolent aliens, and or whether real threats from colleagues pushed him into a so-called nervous breakdown. On the morning of May 22nd, 1947, the brother of James Forrestal came to take him home, but when he got there, James was found dead after falling from his 16th floor room at the Bethesda Naval Hospital. A bathroom sash was knotted tightly around his neck, raising suspicion that he had been murdered, but the death was ruled a suicide. James Forrestal died under very suspicious circumstances. Researchers dedicated to disclosure say he was murdered by the CIA because he objected to the secret methods being established that undermined the due process of law, including the safeguards of the Constitution. Many others would also die when they threatened the secrecy of this control group. NASA means never a straight answer. A report was prepared in the late 1950s under contract to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, by the Brookings Institute, a Washington, D.C. think tank, to identify long-range goals of the United States space program and their impact on American society. The report outlines a need to investigate the possible social consequences of an extraterrestrial discovery and to consider whether such a discovery should be kept from the public in order to avoid political upheaval and a possible devastating effect on scientists themselves due to the discovery that many of their own most cherished theories could be at risk. It also says that the information should be covered up because of the disintegration of our culture due to the shock it would have, especially to the scientific community. Executive Order number 10501, enacted by President Eisenhower in November 1953, outlines, quote, safeguarding official information in the interests of the defense of the United States, end quote. In this document, national security is outlined as a national defense perspective that includes the military, but also geoeconomic and geopolitical concerns as well. When this executive order is combined with the Brookings Institute findings, the result is the legal justification for NASA to cover up anything ET related and to lie to the American people. NASA has always been a division to the Department of Defense and thus beholden to military regulations. Astronauts are subject to military security oaths and regulations. Apart from the fact that the NSA screens all films, broadcasts, and probably radio communications, NASA also stands accused of editing out any information pertaining to an ET presence. Again, they can fall back on the Brookings study on the implications of the discovery of extraterrestrial life and intelligence to justify their actions. The study best describes, better than any other document, the perceived fear that an encounter by our civilization with an advanced race might spell disaster. The report states, quote, anthropological files contain many examples of societies sure of their place in the universe, which have disintegrated when they had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies espousing different ideas and different life ways. Others that survived such an experience usually did so by paying the price of changes in values and attitudes and behavior." End quote. There are other political motives for keeping anything ET related top secret. The announcement of an ET presence on Earth would be front page news for months. It would stymie and dominate the government's every action and severely disrupt its ability to carry out routine business. It would be the Watergate scandal times 1,000. Agencies like NASA would become irrelevant overnight. The government would face the question of why they continued to fund NASA when they knew such technologically primitive space efforts were a total waste of taxpayer money. We all know, however, that NASA's space shuttle program has been permanently retired by the DoD, according to a March 28, 2012 report on CBS's 60 Minutes. Under the Obama administration, the next manned space contract is being offered to the private sector. Critics consider the private commercialization of space technology a mistake. While it is too early to tell, elimination of the Defense Department's regulations of military secrecy could be a step in the right direction. Releasing back-engineered products. The military-industrial complex is now multinational. There is a massive secret black system which issues oaths of secrecy and even threats, the existence of which is known, while the details remain deeply hidden. Secrecy oaths and threats especially surround the special access programs. They are protected by a security system of great complexity. This structure has been described as a shadow military existing in parallel with open or overtly classified programs. It is a permanent government which continues to run the show behind the transparently elected government officials who remain largely unaware of its existence. It is beholden to no elected official, not even to the President of the United States. The secret government was originally set up by Harry Truman for programs considered too sensitive for normal classification measures. It is likely that the UFO topic is actually classified by one or more laws duly enacted by Congress in the late 1940s, as described above, concerning national security, but without any overt reference to UFOs, of course, and signed into law by President Truman. 3 weeks after Eisenhower learned about ET technology, it went into the Black Operations, which was overseen by the Special Operations Coordinating Group, a part of the intelligence community, including the National Security Council. Information could be as high as 46 levels of clearance above the president now, who has access on a need-to-know basis only. Such clearance covering is set up to allow technology to be relatively openly developed until the time it is ready for application in a black program. The overt cover program is then usually canceled, having accomplished its purpose. This also occurs today with biological products being supplied to the Monsanto Corporation. Originally, Bell Laboratories were given many items to study and back engineer under the disguise of research and development. This happened to the F-30 National Aerospace Plane Project in 1994. It appears to be an unrealistic, ambitious program that was eventually canceled. It was, in reality, a cover for what is almost certainly a black world hypersonic aircraft, according to defense analysts who studied the program. Speculation hints this may be the source of the phantom sonic boom phenomenon reported since the early 1990s. All of this results in very effective isolation and allows virtually no one in a position of open civilian government authority to be aware of the truth. Still, at least in principle, the Special Access Program Oversight Committee, that is SAPOC, should be cognizant of such a program. But the situation has only gotten so out of control that those involved in these deep black programs have essentially become a breakaway civilization. The black operations, from the secret space program to the enormous network of underground bases, to the financing of the largely unaccountable actions of the CIA and the NSA, the US government behind the government wields an amazing amount of control and assets. In short, the way the black operations are financed is, first, money is siphoned out of other programs by the CIA, or is simply announced as missing, such as the $2.3 trillion Donald Rumsfeld announced the day before the attacks on 9/11. Money also comes from the CIA Drug Smuggling Division. The CIA then takes the money and distributes it to the agencies of choice, mostly to the Department of Defense. The CIA has in its mission statement not to operate domestically, yet their tentacles are all over the place inside and out of this country, seemingly out of control and certainly not accountable to US citizens. Regional privateer cells compromise an international ring or rent a terrorist for the continuation of government, COG. This is where the missing trillions went. The new American battlefront is being fought using information warfare, utilizing sophisticated mind control techniques, including psychological warfare, propaganda, misinformation, intimidation, fear, and manipulation. It is, in fact, a usually quiet war being fought mostly with silent weapons, but when unleashed, it can become deafening and destructive. Ordo ab chaos, or order out of chaos, dictates that the old order must be completely and thoroughly dismantled before the New World Order, the third wave or third way, can be established. A one-world socialist government is the stated and avowed policy of the United States government. The United States created the United Nations. In 1961, the United States State Department wrote the policy known as State Department Publication 7277, a document designed to disarm the American public while building up the United Nations armed forces and establishing a new global governance. The Black Ops have waged a silent war against its own citizens, and it won when no one was paying attention on New Year's Eve 2011, when President Obama signed the NDAA, Martial Law Bill, into law. The American broadcast media has been eerily silent on NDAA's passage into law, despite the fact that foreign newspapers and broadcast networks have been covering this as one of their top international stories. The cartoon character Pogo once observed, quote, "We have met the enemy, and he is us," end quote. In a twist of irony, the fictional character Pogo resided in a swamp, and the District of Columbia was built on a reclaimed swamp. And I think time will tell if President Trump will be able to drain the swamp. According to financial journalist Benjamin Fulford, upwards of 90% of the U.S. budget is going to the military and the black operations. Fulford says there is an easy way to check his numbers. Just look at the U.S. external trade deficit and compare it to the U.S. military budget. There are amazing similarities over the years. He says that's the simple reason the military does not produce tradable goods. They are a parasitic entity on the United States and, by extension, the world economy. War is big business. Simply stated, war is big business. Perhaps the military-industrial complex is the biggest industry ever developed in history. The elite who continue to meet behind closed doors will always push for wider wars, which today leads to incalculable suffering in the Middle East and elsewhere. After all, the money masters have long profited from war and mass murder. War is always by deception. Nathan Rothschild made a financial bet on Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo, all the while funding the Duke of Wellington's peninsular campaign against Napoleon. He had information delivered to him a day early, sold some shares to dupe London stockbrokers into thinking Napoleon won, then acquired a massive portfolio at rock-bottom prices before the market adjusted to the real news that Napoleon lost at Waterloo. The House of Rothschild also financed the Prussian War, the Crimean War, and the British attempt to seize the Suez Canal from the French, and also financed the Mexican War and the Civil War in the United States. They also cornered the gunpowder market, selling the key war-making ingredient to both sides of every conflict. Control of national currencies is the core of their power methodology. The elite financed Mussolini and Hitler, planned World War I and II, and financed all sides in order to dupe the population and consolidate their power. For more than a century, their goal has been to create a single global government. The attempt to create a League of Nations after World War I was funded by the Rockefeller and Rothschild families. The plan failed, but was revived as the United Nations after World War II on property in New York City gifted by the Rockefellers. As wonderful as it's made out to be with its diversity and peacekeepers, the UN seems to be the front organization for the one world authority, with NATO as its militant arm and the World Bank as its financial enforcer. All the think tank organizations that promote war, as well as the World Health Organization and the World Trade Organization, were the creation of the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, or Morgans. As such, wars have been created in modern history to consolidate power domestically throughout the West. The kings or leaders going to war needed to borrow huge sums of money, which the bankers held. In the last century, wars have been created in order to build support for international agencies that would provide the backbone of a formal world government, which is the elite banking family's great dream. These roundtable agencies are the United Nations, Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the Club of Rome, the Bilderberg Group, and other less influential agencies. But make no mistake, near total global control lies within the hands of the elite. Senator Barry Goldwater wrote in his 1964 book entitled With No Apologies, quote, "The Trilateral Commission is intended to be the vehicle for multinational consolidation of the commercial and banking interests by seizing world control of the political government of the United States. The Trilateral Commission represents a skillful, coordinated effort to seize control and consolidate the four centers of power: political, monetary, intellectual, and ecclesiastical. What the Trilateral Commission intends is to create a worldwide economic power superior to the political governments of the nation states involved. As managers and creators of the system, they will rule the future," end quote. How did it come to this? This grim scenario started in 1776 when economist Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations. He believed that for fiat money to work globally, there could be no national currency based on the gold standard. Top bankers developed a plan to get all the world's gold off the market, then divide the wealth among nations according to the wealth they created. But first, it was essential to eliminate the gold standard. Any nation with physical gold would disrupt the plan and be a risk to the rest of the nations. So the new rules stipulated that no one was allowed to own gold. In 1921, the Bank of International Settlements was created in accordance to a secret plan to confiscate all the world's gold. This occurred through Japan's Emperor Hirohito, who was given the green light to invade East Asia and begin to rob about 85% of the world's gold. China had amassed huge gold supplies from centuries of trading its spices, silk, and other commodities. They stored their gold in various locations, which remained concealed. However, some was confiscated by the Imperial Japanese Army, while other stocks were shipped abroad, especially in 1938 when 7 U.S. battleships full of gold from Asia were sent to the U.S. via the Federal Reserve. For this, gold bonds were issued. The Nazis were also instrumental in collecting Europe's gold, and by the very end of World War II, the confiscation of all gold was complete. There has been a very clandestine battle over the dollar printing machine to control the global financial system. In July 1944, leaders of the Allied countries who were set to win the Second World War gathered in a rural New Hampshire hotel to determine how certain interests would be preserved. This meeting is commonly known as the Bretton Woods Conference. 2 new Rothschild's world banks were created at Bretton Woods: the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, and the World Bank were introduced. The participants also decided to grant Britain, France, and the United States the right to control the world's currency. With a few honorable dissenters, notably like the great British economist John Maynard Keynes, the negotiators were determined to do one thing. They wanted to build a global financial system that ensured the money and resources of the planet were forever under their influence. They set up a series of institutions designed singularly for that purpose, and that is how the IMF and the World Bank were delivered into the world. The IMF's official job sounds simple and attractive. Its function is to ensure that poor countries don't fall into debt, and if they do, to lift them out with loans and economic expertise. It is presented as the third world's best friend and guardian, but beyond the rhetoric, the IMF was designed to be dominated by a handful of rich countries, and more specifically, by their bankers and financial speculators. Make no mistake, the IMF works in the bankers' interests every step of the way. According to Wikipedia, there are only 120,000 tons of gold in the world. But according to David Wilcock's groundbreaking series, Financial Tyranny, Defeating the Greatest Cover-Up of All Time, there is actually 2 million tons of gold held. The total worth of all the world's gold is $11 million trillion. The biggest secret is that gold is not scarce, and when this becomes known, gold prices will plummet. It was all confiscated wealth and kept hidden so no power could rise up against all the nation's fiat currency plans. The reality is that all fiat money is based on nothing but the faith citizens put into it. That is, until the new BRICS bank comes online with a new gold-backed currency based on the Chinese yuan. By 1954, the Kuomintang Chinese began to suspect that the United Nations was not spending the interest on their gold money on projects that were agreed upon. For example, the UN was not developing in Asia or Africa. Along with the Indonesian president Suharto, they started demanding results. John F. K. issued Executive Order 11110 to return the US dollar to a silver-backed currency. He was assassinated 3 months later. When the 1944 Bretton Woods Charter was set to expire in 1994, another lawsuit was issued to reclaim the lost Asian gold. The Federal Reserve said no. So in 1998, China sued once again to reclaim its gold. The feds lost the lawsuit. They were ordered to return the gold to China on the date of September 12th, 2001. The gold reserves were held in a massive vault under World Trade Center Building 7, the third building to collapse on 9/11 after 2 planes crashed into the Twin Towers. The feds could buy some more time by claiming the gold was destroyed, when in fact it was removed in the days and weeks prior. A few years later, China attempted another lawsuit, but this time they were paid in fake gold. So in 2008, the Kuomintang wealthy families in China, not the communist government, realized they were being scammed and caused the dollar to collapse. After the financial crisis of 2008, they were shocked at TAARP finance money being printed and flooding the market. The feds once again had found a slippery way out. Secrets benefit the elite. The elite involved in the black programs are among the smartest people on the planet, but remain deeply puzzled by much of what they have learned. They tend to regard the public with disdain, like undisciplined and unruly children who are incapable of handling information of extraordinary complexity. Over the past 50 years, the highest courts have accepted and upheld the precedents of national security over the First and Fourth Amendments. So even if the public wanted to know, this wish would not constitute a legal need or right to know. The secret government believes it is doing its patriotic duty by trying to control the situation within the established rules of national security. The real issue for the controlling elite is not so much about money, but control. Control has always been the dominant goal. The elite Western power brokers who actually run the secret governments remain tremendously powerful and apparently have tens or hundreds of trillions of dollars at their command. Some of this money has been siphoned off from other U.S. government programs, defense contracts, or simply gone missing, including a new missing $8.5 trillion reported in 2015. Throughout much of the 20th century and into the 21st century, the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR, and the Trilateral Commission have been calling the shots behind closed doors. The CFR is one of the most powerful semi-official groups concerned with America's role in international affairs. The CFR does not conform to government policy. The government conforms to CFR policy. For the last 50 years at least, the same international globalists continue to pull the global strings. They primarily seek profit and control over the population. Similar to the three regions of the world in George Orwell's classic 1984, each regional bloc is played off against the other. Today we have the European Union, the American bloc, and the soon-to-be Asian Union. These will become the three power brokers on the planet. There can never be unity and full cooperation, as one is always going to play off the others. Clearly, one of the top motives is to keep free energy out of public view, mainly because the Persian Gulf region is still flooded in oil. Secret technology could easily be moving the world off of fossil fuels completely, but that would mean there would be too much oil left in the ground, resulting in huge revenue losses. That's why secret technologies must be kept secret no matter how they might benefit humanity. Power, control, and riches are very powerful motivators. Let's not forget the first acknowledged billionaire on the planet was oil tycoon John D. Rockefeller. His descendants, as with the ever-secretive Rothschilds dynasty, still wield vast influence around the world today. If we can break this petrochemical stranglehold, we'll soon see a clean and free energy future. When you follow the money and arrive at the top of the pyramid, above even the Bank of International Settlements, which is a global version of the Federal Reserve, you'll find the controllers of the world. They fit the description of a secret society because there's little or no information revealed about what is said at their meetings, what is done, or what is decided behind closed doors. No publicity of any kind is allowed. Their members cannot take notes, film, or record the discussions or talk about the meetings outside the group. They are sworn to absolute secrecy, often under penalty of death. If the Bilderbergers, the Trilateral Commission, the Masons, the Priory of Sion, the Council on Foreign Relations, Skull and Bones, the Illuminati, the Council of 300, the White Brotherhood, the Black Nobility, and so many others are really working for the good of all humanity, wouldn't it be appropriate to see a live feed on TV or the internet of their discussions and highest level decision making? Corporations versus democracy. What should citizens do when the cabal subverts the will of the people and takes over the space that democracy ought to occupy? Until we lose all of our civil rights, we can still let our voices be heard, stay informed, and peacefully protest. In theory, we can re-elect a new government that truly represents the will of the people. But first, there is a cancer on elected office that needs to be remedied. That cancer is corporation influence and lobbyist money. Corporations are extremely influential in the decisions the government makes on all levels. If we make election campaign contributions completely illegal, the corporate power over politicians can be seriously weakened. Robert Kennedy Jr., the second oldest son of Bobby Kennedy, never did run for public office, but has been a tireless environmental activist. He fought against the coal industry, historically one of the most aggressive lobbyist groups. When Kennedy was asked during a June 2011 PBS interview with Tavis Smiley, what is the battle between corporations and democracy in this country beyond just coal? He gave a chilling example of an energy company subverting local government, illegally polluting and disobeying the will of the people. Kennedy replied to Tavis, quote, Appalachia, in particularly West Virginia, is the template for what happens when corporations take over a democracy. It's a company town. What they're doing is illegal. In fact, if you filled 25 feet of a Hudson River tributary, you would be in jail. If you blew up a mountain in the Berkshires or the Catskills or California or Utah, you would go to jail or place for the criminally insane. Corporations versus democracy. What should citizens do when the cabal subverts the will of the people and takes over the space that democracy ought to occupy? Until we lose all of our civil rights, we can still let our voices be heard, stay informed, and peacefully protest. In theory, we can re-elect a new government that truly represents the will of the people. But first, there is a cancer on elected office that needs to be remedied. That cancer is corporation influence and lobbyist money. Corporations are extremely influential in the decisions that government makes on all levels. If we make an election campaign contribution completely illegal, the corporate power over politicians can be seriously weakened. Robert Kennedy Jr., the second oldest son of Bobby Kennedy, never did run for public office, but he has been a tireless environmental activist. He fought against the coal industry, historically one of the most aggressive lobbyist groups. When Kennedy was asked during a June 2011 PBS interview with Tavis Smiley, what is the battle between corporations and democracy in this country beyond just coal? He gave a chilling example of an energy company subverting local government, illegally polluting, and disobeying the will of the people. Kennedy replied to Tavis, quote, Appalachia, in particularly West Virginia, is the template for what happens when corporations take over a democracy. It's a company town. What they're doing is illegal. In fact, if you filled 25 feet of a Hudson River tributary, you would be in jail. If you blew up a mountain in the Berkshires or the Catskills or California or Utah, you would go to jail or a place for the criminally insane. But they have flattened an area larger than the state of Delaware. They've blown up the 500 biggest mountains in West Virginia in the last 10 years, and it's all illegal. They've buried 2,500 miles of rivers and streams. That's illegal. You can't do it, end quote. Kennedy also went on, quote, I debated on West Virginia TV a year ago with Don Blankenship, who is the head of Massey, which is the biggest mountaintop removal company. I said to him, by your own records, you had 67,000 violations of the Clean Water Act. Over the past 5 years, you've had tens of thousands of violations of labor laws, of mining safety laws, and all these other laws. Is it possible for you to make a profit without violating a law? He said, no. He said, these are silly laws. So he acknowledged that his company is a criminal enterprise. Their business plan is to break the law, then get away with it. In order to do that, you have to subvert democracy. So if you go to West Virginia, their democracy essentially doesn't exist. When we have a government that tortures people, continued Kennedy, that suspends our Bill of Rights, suspends habeas corpus, that says the Bill of Rights is a luxury we can't afford anymore, that does extraordinary renditions and whisks American citizens out of the country to places that tortures them and eavesdrops illegally on hundreds of thousands of people, as our government is now doing. That is a threat to democracy. But the bigger threat comes from unleashed corporate power. We have to understand in this country that the domination of business by government is called communism. The domination of government by business is called fascism. And that's what you are seeing, that form of government. End quote. Kennedy then goes on to offer a solution. Quote, well, our job is to walk that narrow trail in between and hold big business at bay with our right hand and big government at bay with our left, and walk that narrow trail in between, which is free market capitalism and democracy. To do that, we need an independent press that is willing to stand up and speak the truth to power and is going to inform the public. Quote, well, our job is to walk that narrow trail in between and hold big business at bay with our right hand and big government at bay with our left, and walk that narrow trail in between, which is free market capitalism and democracy. To do that, we need an independent press that is willing to stand up and speak truth to power and is going to inform the public. And we need an informed public that can recognize all the milestones of tyranny. And we don't have either of those things left in this country, end quote. Unfortunately, Robert Kennedy Jr. will not seek election for any public office. He has all too clearly seen the danger of running for office as an honest U.S. politician. Corrupt to the core. Woodrow Wilson, the 28th president of the United States, perhaps expressing regret because he was president when the Federal Reserve came to power, warned the American people of a powerful, almost invisible influence to the highest office. Quote, since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confined to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the U.S. in the field of commerce and manufacturing are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. End quote. To understand this warning by Wilson over a century ago is to identify the complex web of deceit between the ultra-elite and a complicit government. On his deathbed in 1924, Woodrow Wilson made the following telling confession. Quote, "We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled governments in the civilized world. No longer a government of free opinion, no longer a government by a vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men." End quote. Wilson lamented, "I have unwittingly ruined my government." A government controlled by hidden, powerful, moneyed interests, as Wilson indicated, was nothing new then, and it has only increased in spades now. Lobbyists transparently shower gifts on lawmakers on behalf of clients to influence legislation with campaign contributions. Stated simply, amoral, moneyed interest targets select members of Congress for favors in return. Infamous lobbyist Jack Abramoff claimed to have spent $1 million per year. Quote, "We owned them," he said on 60 Minutes in an interview that aired in November 2011. One of his strategies was to offer chief of staffers a lobby job later on. By doing this, he held considerable power over staffers and elected officials. Lobbyists are routinely offered 3 times the salary of congressional officers to join them on K Street. The interview went on to reveal that over 100 congressional offices were directly influenced by Jack Abramoff alone. Trips, free food, and drinks in his signature restaurant were commonplace. Lobbyists would request the insertion of language into reform bills to change U.S. laws, deliberately rewritten to insert bought favors. In short, Abramoff said corruption and bribery was what he engaged in by gifting gifts to people who make the laws for U.S. citizens. He would orchestrate corporate campaign contributions to the reelection campaign of members. Now reformed and out of prison, Jack Abramoff said lobbying is subverting the essence of our political system by plying members of Congress who, as intended, only make tiny attempts at reform. Congress reformed the law by declining free meals, only to be replaced with fundraiser lunches. Abramoff suggests prohibiting members of congressional staff from ever becoming lobbyists. He says the situation now is as bad as it's ever been. The laws and the people who make the laws are the same people who have to change the laws. It's like putting a fox in to protect the hen house, said Abramoff. The powers of financial capitalism have far-reaching aims to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system is to be controlled in a feudalistic fashion by the central banks of the world acting in concert, by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. The apex of this system is the Bank for International Settlements, BIS, headquartered in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which are themselves private corporations. The BIS is now composed of 55 member nations, but the club that meets regularly in Basel is a much smaller group, and even within it, there is a hierarchy. In a 1983 article in Harper's Magazine called, quote, "Ruling the World of Money," end quote, by Edward J. Epstein, who wrote that the real business gets done is in a, quote, sort of inner club made up of the half dozen or so powerful central bankers who find themselves more or less in the same monetary boat, end quote. Those core bankers come from Germany, Switzerland, Italy, England, and the Federal Reserve governors in the United States. They are able to dominate the political system of each country, the media, and the economy of the world as a whole. Some of the bankers who own the Federal Reserve are not even U.S. citizens, yet the internet has somewhat leveled the playing field, or as Ron Paul described, the internet has become an alternative to the government media complex. The internet keeps us free. The internet has now entered the equation, and this is unprecedented. Yet at the same time, we are losing traditional print investigative journalism. Now people are informing each other via the internet and social media, as this is currently the most trusted source of news. Look at the impact social media websites have had on the development of the 2011 Arab Spring. Besides a way of dynamic interpersonal communication, the internet has become the greatest threat to all the secret societies, especially the secret government behind the government, because we, the people, still have a chance to take back the USA. In the view of those in the secret government, there is no direct or immediate solution to the internet's impact. Recall when Egyptian President Mubarak hit the internet kill switch before his ouster. After all, if they can keep us an ignorant populace, we will be a complacent populace. But the Arab Spring proved the people do have the power to enforce change upon the ruling elite. And what might we see if we were to get a glimpse beyond the technological iron curtain of the U.S. national security state today? There is evidence of anti-gravity devices which propel advanced American star fleets capable of interstellar travel, according to British computer whiz Gary McKinnon. What he found between 2001 and 2002, when he hacked into 97 government, military, and NASA computers, is suppressed evidence of reverse engineered UFO technology and free energy devices that could help reverse climate change. The most shocking find to McKinnon, the one he thought would be his ace in the hole when negotiating with the U.S. government, is what he stumbled upon in the systems of U.S. Space Command. McKinnon says he found a log of 20 to 30 names listed as non-terrestrial officers. He did not believe that these were aliens, but he interpreted the statements as evidence that the U.S. military has a secret battalion in space. He read the names and ranks of personnel and ship-to-ship and fleet-to-fleet transfers of material on Excel spreadsheets. McKinnon tried to find a corresponding listing of the Space Command personnel which he had seen, but was unable to find a match. Interestingly, the names of two of the ships he saw on the transfer logs were the USSS Limay and the USSS Hillenkotter. Typically, Navy sea ships has names with just two S's, an acronym for United States Ship. However, there are three S's here, presumably standing for United States Space Ship. McKinnon, who suffers from Asperger's syndrome, claims his actions were benign, as he simply wanted to prevent old age pensioners from dying of the cold, and free energy technology could help do that. He made his findings without stealing passwords, breaking through firewalls, or using anything more than commercial software and a 56K modem. Although driven by altruistic motives, eventually McKinnon got caught and fought U.S. extradition for over a decade. It is likely McKinnon passed this information on to the whistleblower website WikiLeaks, whose founder, Julian Assange, also faces extradition to the USA. Assange says he has official U.S. cables with countries abroad regarding UFOs and other sensitive documents. Many in the hacker chat room community consider both of these men true heroes of free speech and justice.